A single call to the Pentagon was enough to shatter the careers of two men and expose a truth that had been avoided for years. It should have just been a routine drive through the quiet countryside of Louisiana, a place people only pass through on their way to somewhere else. But for Major General Monica Hayes, this was the first time she had driven through such desolate roads. No escort, no sirens, just her, a rental car, and a top-secret mission at the Redwood Air Force Base. Everything was meticulously timed, and she had no room for mistakes. Then, along the stretch of road between Shelby Lake and Winston Ridge, right on the edge of the small town of Elmsfield, Monica's encrypted phone suddenly lost signal. She needed to make a call. Not later, but immediately. Fortunately, she spotted an old gas station called Benny's Gas, and Deli standing alone in the cracked land. It wasn't much to look at, but it was enough for her to stop. Monica parked her car at the back of the building away from a group of locals leaning against some pickup trucks chatting in the sweltering heat. She didn't think twice. To her, it was just a place with better reception. Monica grabbed her secure device, stepped out, and held the phone to her ear. Her voice was calm, professional as always. "This is General Hayes, verifying my identity." Commencing with the transmission. On the other end of the line, the officer immediately began relaying the briefing orders updates, a torrent of top-secret data that only a few individuals across the country had access to. Monica's gaze remained alert, scanning the area out of instinct, as was the habit of a seasoned military officer. But she didn't break focus from the call. A few glances began drifting her way. She didn't look like someone who would stop in this area, and she certainly didn't look like someone with authority if she wasn't in uniform or wearing a badge. Her attire was simple jeans, plain sneakers, a loose olive green jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low over her short, curly hair. Everything was normal, exactly the kind of style she preferred to maintain. But not everyone saw it that way. Inside the store, Darla Quinn, a woman in her 50s with a stiff blonde bun and a stern face, was watching Monica from behind the counter. Darla didn't see a female general with medals across her chest. She didn't see a woman on the phone. What she saw was trouble without wasting time. Darla picked up the old-fashioned landline and covered the mouthpiece so the customers couldn't hear. "There's a suspicious woman near the pumps. She said she looks shady, like she's on drugs. Odd behavior. Someone should come check her out." Darla hung up before the other end could ask any more questions. A few blocks away, in an old patrol car, two officers were listening to the radio. Nothing exciting ever happened in Elmsfield, so they didn't mind a little noise if it helped break the monotony. Both officers wore sunglasses, hopped in the car, and headed toward the gas station. By now, Monica was still glued to her encrypted conversation, unaware that real danger was closing in. Just as she was about to receive the next set of orders, the police car's lights flashed, reflecting off the dusty windows of the store. Things were about to change. The patrol car slid into the lot, gravel flying. Monica lowered the phone a beat, squinting at the flashing blue and red lights. Two officers jumped out of the car before it had even come to a complete stop. The taller one, Sergeant Brian Huxley, was in his 30s, with a buzz cut and a muscular build immediately unsnapping his holster. Beside him was Eric Boone, younger, leaner, but looking even more eager. They approached like they were ready to start trouble. Monica could feel the pressure building in the air. She gently placed the communication device on the hood of the car, raised both hands, palms outward, just like she had been taught at West Point years ago. Her voice was steady, controlled, "Good afternoon, gentlemen. How may I assist you?" Huxley barked, "ID and license." Now, Monica took half a step forward, calmly retrieving her wallet from her back pocket. "Of course I'm an officer on duty. Major General Monica Hayes. I have my credentials." Boone sneered mockingly, "General. You think we're going to believe that Monica pulled out her military ID and federal orders, handing them over smoothly as though she had done this 100 times before?" Huxley snatched them, glanced at them, and shook his head. "Fake," he spat, tossing the papers onto the hood of the car like trash. "Fake documents." Huxley muttered flatly, then threw Monica's military ID onto the hood of the car like it was just a crumpled piece of trash. Monica hesitated for the first time throughout this confrontation, feeling genuinely stunned. "Officer, I assure you that—" "Shut up," Boone interrupted sharply. "You think you can fool us. You picked the wrong town lady." A few locals had started to gather. The customers pumping gas, a few truck drivers, and some store employees all had begun to stop, look around, whispering and some even smiling as if they were about to watch a show. No one stepped forward. No one spoke up. Monica knew well that this was the point where things could spiral out of control. She had been trained to de-escalate, not to confront, but deep down she understood these two didn't need a reason. They had sized her up from the first moment, a woman of color, standing alone without a uniform or a badge. She took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady. "I suggest you contact your superior. You are making a serious mistake," but her words didn't faze them. Huxley pulled out handcuffs, the steel glinting in the sunlight. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Monica remained still, not because she was defying them, but because something inside her had risen. A heavy feeling that had been suppressed now threatened to burst free from her chest. "I am a Major General in the United States Army," she said, her voice now sharp as a knife. "You are arresting me unlawfully." Huxley laughed loudly, the sound echoing across the parking lot like a slap to her dignity. "Right, sure, I'm probably the president, too." Then he moved forward before Monica could react. Boone had already grabbed her arm, and Huxley quickly locked the other wrist behind her back. The cold snap of the handcuffs echoed sharply, silencing the crowd for a beat. The cold metal dug into her skin. Monica clenched her teeth, fighting back the pain and the rush of humiliation swelling inside her. The secure phone, still connected to the Pentagon, fell to the ground with a soft thud. It wasn't a loud sound, but to Monica it was the breaking of her trust. The voice on the other end of the line came through urgently. "General Hayes. Can you hear me? General Hayes." Neither of the officers heard it, or perhaps they didn't care. Huxley shoved Monica against the side of the rental car, making the door shake. The crowd around them let out a low, collective gasp, unsure whether it was from shock or excitement. "Got her," Boone said as if he had just won a hunting game. Monica gasped, her eyes fixed on the grimy window of Benny's Gas and Deli. Her reflection was shattered by streaks of dirt, as though she too were being torn apart. In that moment, she was no longer General Hayes. She was no one, just a body being tossed around because people felt they could. But somewhere else, thousands of miles away in a command center in Washington, D.C., the red lights began flashing. Lieutenant Colonel Seth Morgan sat in front of a row of large screens, staring at the signal showing Jen Hayes, secure. The audio feed became distorted, static, shouting incomprehensible words. Then, silence. Seth leaned into the mic. "General Hayes, this is the Coordination Center. Can you hear us? Please respond. No answer." He turned to Colonel Alicia Benton, who had walked over to the command center as soon as the irregular signal appeared. Without hesitation, she gave the order, "Track her immediately." Within seconds, a technician pulled up a map with a blinking red dot not at Redwood Base, but at a gas station on Route 171 near Elmsfield, almost a name no one at the Pentagon had ever heard of. Alesha leaned toward Seth, her lips tight. "Contact base, security, patch me through to Jag. If she's in trouble, we act immediately, back in Elmsfield." Monica sat on the curb, her back against the gas station wall, her hands cuffed behind her. Sweat poured down the back of her neck, but she kept her back straight, her gaze unwavering. "What's your real name?" Boone asked, blocking the sunlight like a nightmare. "Who do you work for?" Monica exhaled softly through her nose, replying slowly, "My name, my documents. Everything you need is right there," Huxley sneered. "2 more seconds and you'll be charged with obstruction of justice. Don't push it." She didn't say another word. She didn't need to explain herself to someone who didn't want to listen, but her eyes scanned the parking lot, and this time she saw the phone being pulled out. Someone was filming. People were starting to talk. She was no longer alone, at least not with the camera lens. From the front door, Darla Quinn stood with her arms crossed, leaning against the frame, her expression smug as though watching a bad play unfold. Everything was starting to slip out of orbit. Suddenly, Boone's radio crackled, "Send to Unit 3. Confirm detainment." Huxley grabbed the radio, pressed the button to respond. "Detained, female around 40, uncooperative." A pause, then a response, serious cold as steel. "Note, subject has been federally marked. Repeat. Federally marked. The Pentagon has activated the emergency channel. Release the subject immediately and await further instructions." Huxley's face turned pale. Boone stood frozen, the smile he had just started to form vanishing in an instant. "What the hell is this?" Boone muttered. Monica didn't say a word. She just looked up, meeting their eyes. Not angry, not afraid, just a gaze that knew exactly who she was. Huxley awkwardly fumbled through his pockets for the keys. His hand trembled as he unlocked the cuffs, avoiding eye contact with her. He mumbled something between sorry and mom, but there was no dignity in his words. Monica slowly stood up, feeling the blood rush back to her wrists after being tightly restrained. Not a single word escaped her lips. She didn't need to say anything more. It was her silence at that moment that was the loudest voice in that parking lot. Monica stood up slowly. The red marks from the handcuffs were still visible on her wrists, the skin swollen where the metal had dug into her flesh. She rotated her wrists slightly, feeling the dull ache spreading from her joints. No one spoke, no more laughter, no more whispers. The air was thick, as if time itself had drained from the parking lot. Even Darla Quinn, the woman who had always stood with her smug expression behind the glass, had lost her usual mocking grin. Monica bent down to pick up the phone. The screen was cracked. The connection had been cut. The secure call had shattered along with all the critical data she had been receiving. She turned to look directly at the 2 officers. Her gaze was sharp like a blade that sliced through the layers of their denial. "You will pay for this," Monica said. Her voice wasn't loud, wasn't angry. It was a calm statement, yet heavy with weight. Not tomorrow, not next week, but today. Huxley opened his mouth as if to speak, but the sound of tires screeching on the road reached them, followed by the synchronized roar of engines filling the air. The headlights swept a cold circle over the parking lot. It wasn't the town's patrol car. It wasn't the local response team. It was a convoy of sleek black SUVs with military markings coming from the Redwood Air Force Base. They glided into the lot like waves crashing onto the rocky shore, powerful and unstoppable. The car doors opened at the same time without delay, without unnecessary movements. The people stepping out didn't smile, didn't speak. They were Air Force security officers moving with the precision of Swiss watches. Cold eyes, decisive gestures. Leading the group was Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Trenton, a middle-aged man, his eyes sharp as if he could see through all lies. He walked across the lot with long strides, holding a thick file in his hands. His gaze fixed firmly on Monica as though he had already set his sights on his target. "General Hayes, are you injured?" Trenton's voice rang clear in the tense space. Monica shook her head slightly. "No, Colonel. Just a few minor scratches. The real pain is in their careers." Boone and Huxley began to stir, as if finally realizing they had gone too far with no way to turn back. The Redwood Base officers quickly moved to form a barrier between Monica and the two town officers. No orders were given. Everyone just knew what needed to be done. Trenton faced Huxley and Boone, his face void of any emotion. "You are suspended immediately pending a federal investigation. Any actions from here on may be considered obstruction of justice." Huxley stuttered. We didn't know who she was." "That's not an excuse." Trenton cut him off. "You had the documents. You had everything you needed to know who she was." Boone still tried to stand his ground. "She exhibited suspicious behavior." Trenton looked straight into his eyes. "You saw a woman of color on the phone and you decided she was the problem. That decision will follow you for the rest of your life." No one said anything more. The security team led Monica to the SUV gently but firmly. The door slammed shut, separating her from the eyes of the crowd. As the convoy pulled away from the lot, Monica glanced back just once. She saw Huxley wiping the sweat from his brow with trembling hands. Darla Quinn recoiled and ran into the store like a cockroach fleeing the light. Inside the vehicle, Monica remained silent. Her gaze was fixed on the field stretching outside the window. The crooked telephone poles lining the road, the shabby rooftops of a town now entering history. Not for its beauty, but for the truth that had just been exposed, Lieutenant Colonel Trenton broke the silence. The Pentagon is launching a full investigation. The Department of the Interior, the Federal Human Rights Office, all have been notified, and this time everything will be public, whether Elmsfield likes it or not. Monica didn't nod, nor did she show any emotion. They should have known better. She said her voice, even Trenton exhaled. Now they'll know what it feels like to be seen for what they truly are. The convoy continued down the weed-covered road. In the distance, Redwood Base slowly came into view under the sunlight, a place where Monica's honor would be restored. But she knew the real battle had yet to begin, and this time the whole country would be watching. The news of the incident spread faster than expected. Even before Monica completed her report at the base, a video taken by phone had already been posted on social media. The shaky, blurry footage couldn't hide the truth. Two Elmsfield officers were seen handcuffing a calm woman, trying to explain that she was a U.S. Army general. No yelling, no resistance, just the gaze of someone stripped of her dignity by ignorance and arrogance. The video spread like wildfire. The next morning, Elmsfield was no longer an unknown name on the map. It became the center of a nationwide outrage. Television stations replayed the footage over and over. News anchors voiced their indignation. Human rights organizations spoke out, calling it a clear act of racial discrimination. Even veterans groups who typically stayed away from politics spoke out demanding justice for General Hayes. In Elmsfield, the police department was in disarray. Sheriff Hank Dobson, a man more skilled at hunting deer than dealing with the press, stood before dozens of camera lenses, sweat dripping under his cowboy hat. "We apologize for the misunderstanding," he stammered, trying to avoid the journalists' gazes. "The two officers involved have been temporarily suspended pending the investigation." A young reporter from Baton Rouge interrupted him immediately. "Dobson, why couldn't trained officers recognize valid military documents? Could race have influenced their judgment?" Dobson flushed, fumbling for vague answers about work pressure, mistaken identity, and so on. But those present knew there was no hiding the truth anymore. The young reporter from Baton Rouge had barely spoken when the entire room seemed to freeze. "Mr. Dobson, why couldn't trained officers recognize valid military documents? Could race have been a factor in this misunderstanding?" The question dropped into the air like a stone into a calm lake, creating ripples immediately. Under the glare of countless cameras and flashing lights, Chief Hank Dobson stumbled, his lips trembling. He muttered something about work-related stress, about misidentifying someone in a vague situation. But no one among the reporters believed him. The nation was watching, and Dobson knew there was nowhere to hide. The Elmsfield Police Department had been cornered. There were no excuses left to cover up the truth. Meanwhile, Brian Huxley and Eric Boone had completely disappeared. No one heard them speak, nor did anyone see them show up for work. But the internet was not silent. Their names flooded social media news, headlines, and outraged forums. Anonymous sources within the department revealed that these two had been repeatedly accused of abuse of power and racism, but were always handled internally. Not this time. Human rights lawyers from New Orleans and Washington, D.C. collectively filed federal complaints on behalf of General Monica Hayes. The U.S. Department of Justice officially opened an independent investigation. Even the governor of Louisiana, Carla Jensen, couldn't stay silent. She publicly called it a blatant insult to a national hero. At this point, the story was no longer just about Monica Hayes. It had transcended an individual. It became the collective voice of all those who had been doubted, degraded, and insulted, simply because they didn't wear the right uniform, didn't have the right skin color, or simply stepped into a place where others didn't think they belonged. At Redwood Air Force Base, Monica had not a moment's rest. Calls kept coming in. Lawyers, Pentagon, representatives, media officers from the White House. Everyone wanted to know if she was okay, wanted to hear her speak, and Monica, like always, answered each question with the calm voice that had led soldiers through battles. But when she was alone in the quiet of her private space, Monica felt the weight of the world pressing down on her chest. Not because she was surprised, not because she was weak, but deep down, after all the medals, after all the years of service, after all the blood and sweat she had given for her country, on a dusty parking lot in Elmsfield, that still wasn't enough to earn trust. But Monica was not someone to run from a fight, and certainly she wasn't about to start doing so now. She knew that if she was going to speak out, it had to be on her terms. Not for fame, not for the press, but for those who were silently watching, for those who had been treated like she had. For those who hadn't had the chance to speak up, the press conference was scheduled for noon on Saturday, right outside the main gates of Redwood Base. By early morning, a long line of cameras had already packed the entrance. Microphones piled on top of each other, cables tangled like spider webs. Reporters were speaking into their phones, jostling for a good spot. The air was thick, not because of the southern heat, but because of the anticipation of something very important. Monica Hayes walked out of the base gates in her dress uniform for the first time in months. The metals gleamed against the dark fabric, her shoulders strong as if bearing the weight of an unjust world. Her gaze was direct, unflinching, unbowed. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Trenton stood to the right, arms crossed, his gaze wary. A few Pentagon officials stood nearby, their faces tense. They had prepared speeches, diplomatic words to avoid escalating the situation. Monica rejected them all. When she spoke, her voice was clear and resolute, cutting through the noise of passing cars, the flash of cameras, and the breathless silence of the listeners. "My name is General Monica Hayes," she began. "I have served this country for 29 years. I have led troops, advised presidents, and protected the ideals written in the Constitution." She paused for a beat, locking eyes with the crowd. Yesterday in Elmsfield. None of that mattered. Her words dropped like a hammer. "I am not judged by my competence, not by my accomplishments, not by my rank. I am judged by the color of my skin, by the prejudice others place on me." Below, the reporters scribbled furiously. But Monica wasn't speaking for them. She was speaking for those watching online. She was speaking for those who had been in her shoes and were still silent, am not here to demand an apology. She said, her eyes scanning the crowd, am here, because silence is no longer an option. Accountability is non-negotiable. Respect is non-adjustable. Dignity is not for sale. Behind the cameras, the local crowd began to gather. Black families, veterans, students holding homemade signs. Monica caught the gaze of a young boy about 10 years old, standing among the crowd, eyes fixed on her. Anger was there, hope was there, but, most importantly, there was a hunger to see something real. Injustice is nothing new. Monica continued, but change only comes when enough people stop turning away. No slogans, no empty conclusions, just the truth. Am not the one who was humiliated yesterday. They are the ones who have disgraced themselves. And history will remember that. She left the podium without waiting for any questions. The clapping started softly from a few people, then spread slowly but surely. As Monica walked back toward the base, she didn't speed up, nor did she slow down. It was the same steady stride, the kind that carried not only her own story, but the stories of millions who had been hurt and still had to remain silent. Because she understood the world doesn't change in a day. It may not change in her lifetime, but perhaps just one person daring to speak the truth, it would begin to change just a little. And that was enough to fight for. Sometimes what makes a person great is not the medals, not the rank, but the way they maintain their dignity in the face of injustice. The story of General Monica Hayes is not just about a woman mistreated. It is a reminder that no matter who you are, how long you've served, or what you've accomplished, there will always be people who will try to deny your worth simply because of the prejudices deeply embedded in their eyes. But, just like Monica, we have the right and the responsibility to stand up and speak out. Not just for ourselves, but for those who silently endure, for the voices that have never been heard, the call. Monica made that day didn't just connect her to the Pentagon. It connected her to all of America, to the truth, to justice, and to the belief that we can do better, and we must do better. If this story moved you, if it made you think of someone you knew, someone you've seen, or even yourself, don't let it stop here. Please like to support stories that dare to speak the truth. Share this video with friends, family, or anyone who needs inspiration. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to help us spread more powerful stories not just to be heard, but to change the way we see the world. Because change doesn't come from silence. It begins when someone like Monica chooses to speak up, even when their voice trembles. We believe in the power of the truth. We believe in you. See you in the next video, where courage and justice always have a place to be told.